Hey YouTube, it's your boy Anime Princess back with a build guide. Today we're going to go over a crit version of the CI Spark Trickster. This is a standalone build guide, however, it also functions as an extension to the Trickster League Start because that video does hint that you may want to consider crit swapping to boost your damage further into the league, and that's exactly what this video does. Now this is a fairly bare bones skeleton of a crit trickster. There's no mage blood in here. There is a lot of room to pump up the damage even further. We have thrown this at a lot of hard content. It was able to do Uber Cortex just fine. We also threw a bunch of Simulacrum 30s at it. I'd say about half the time it ripped before wave 30, but it always got it done. So, you know, is this hardcore viable for Simulacrum? Maybe not, but definitely it is software viable. Well, let's bring up the stat line. So we're doing just over 9 million damage. This is the absolute minimum. The scenario here would be, say, like an Uber Cyrus arena where your projectiles are shooting off screen and they're just disappearing. They're not coming back because they're going too far away. And the more realistic damage you're going to do is somewhere between that minimum and the maximum, which is the full DPS value of 36 million. And you're going to hit higher values in arenas where the projectiles are able to hit walls and come back and hit multiple times. As for defenses, I don't want to drag this video out too much. It's very strong defensively. You can scale it even further if you want to invest in Mage Blood. And we talk about that in the League Start video. So if you want to understand all the different defensive layers, I would just suggest going back to that League Start video. Now, there is a lot of room to scale this damage further with investment, but we can also pull it back as there are a lot of optional pieces that I am using right now that you could definitely sub out to lower the damage and still have a very effective build. This is my second build of the league, so we do have a bit of currency to play with. Let's pull up a cost breakdown list. The big ticket item is Ashes of the Stars. This is a staple of any Spark build. The added quality to gems gives us a lot of proj speed, which feels great on Spark, and also you can just combine this with a bunch of other alt quality gems to get significant returns. Everything on the Ashes is pretty strong for Spark, so I would recommend using this. It's not core to the build, you don't need to have this, but I like to use it. The next most expensive is my self-crafted Spark Wand. I just pulled this right off my Inquisitor League Starter. It works on this build as well. There's a crafting guide on the channel. Generally costs around 10 to 20 div depending on your RNG. I'm using Awakened Spell Echo for 14. A Sadist Garb self-craft. You know, I'm just going to price this at 10. I don't think it's going to cost more than 10 to self-craft. I may briefly touch on how to craft this later in this video, but I was price searching similar Sadist Garbs and they do go for quite a bit more. They look like they're around 30 div. I will definitely be putting out a standalone crafting guide for a CI Sadist Garb because it's ridiculous. You do not want to be buying this. You want to craft it yourself. It's very easy. Next up, we are using a set of Grand Spectrums. The one for endurance charges is 7 Divine. We have boots and belt. You can either craft those or buy them. I'd say that's going to be around 7 div if you buy them. Probably a bit cheaper if you craft them. You know, we'll touch on this stuff later in the video. Bottled Faith, 5 div. It's important for the crit swap. You can get a Watcher's Eye with 2 different mods. Obviously, don't use the same 2 mods as I'm using because just the fact that I'm putting out the video, that particular combination is going to go up, but there are various different mods that are quite useful. We are using, well, actually, I think I'm only using 1 Divergent Inspiration, but you could use 2, and those run about 3.5. The Grand Spectrum for Power Charge, again, this is really good for a crit swap. That's 2.5. Ancestral Vision gives us ailment immunity. It's 2.5. The helmet is another self-craft. Again, this is pretty easy to craft a CI helmet. You know, same as the body armor, you just throw dense fossils on them. We'll touch on this later. I'm going to value that around 2 div. and then Aziri's Reflection Shield is 2 div, so the total is around 120 divines. And I decided to splurge a little bit, so I'm using the Explode Flask. This is completely not mandatory. You could use a Jade Flask, you could use one of the Elemental Flasks. You have options there, but I wanted, you know, a little bit more clear, so we opted for that luxury item. And another luxury item, which you probably don't want to invest in unless you have everything else, is the Grand Spectrum for Frenzy Charges. You can actually get Frenzy Charge generation on the tree through the Mark Mastery. So you could easily substitute this 35 div with one that either gives us Elemental Res, Crit Chance, or Ellie damage. All of those are very valid Grand Spectrums, but this is like throwing in extra money because you have it type of deal. So that's the running total for the build. It looks pretty high. Again, there's no Mage Blood on here, and a lot of these things, so the luxury stuff, you definitely can skip. And I suppose even stuff like Awakened Spell Echo, you can skip that as well. So you can definitely dial the price back down and still have a very functional build. But this is what we're working with. This is what's in the POB. Just, you know. Let's dive into the POB. First thing we should touch on is how to crit cap. As you can see, we are at 100% crit chance. Technically speaking, you don't need to get all the way to 100. This isn't like Inquisitor where your penetration hinges on your crit chance. However, as a crit build, you do want to get as much as you can with reasonable amounts of investment. And we were able to reasonably invest all the way up to 100%. So going over to the calcs page, we can look at our crit chance, and you can see Spark has a base crit of 6, and we increased the base crit all the way up to 11.34. It's important to increase base crit because it's going to make all those increases to our critical strike chance have much higher impact. The biggest way of increasing the base crit is from a boot implicit that gives us brittle, and I believe this is buffed by our ailment effect. So this is giving me 2.9% to base crit. Some people might think this is not too reliable because you do have to be standing on top of the enemy to get that brittle. However, with the Trickster playstyle, you do want to be standing on top of those uber bosses anyways. It kind of helps you see the telegraphed moves regardless, but also we're going to have Culling Strike on our Vortex. We're going to have to put the Vortex directly on the boss to get the Algor Mortis bonus damage. So adding brittle to the mix makes sense there. We also have some base crit from Frost Shield. Frost Shield will drain our energy shield very fast. That's why you see this huge negative for energy shield regen. However, we leech like 3 times more than that drain, so you're not even going to see the drain most of the time. That's going to add some base crit, and I was able to snag an Algor Mortis with base crit on the implicit as a corruption. You know, you can definitely hit 100% without that corruption, but that's just a nice convenient thing to have. As for the increases to our critical strike chance, inspiration support, getting those inspiration charges is quite handy. We are using power charges through the lab jewels, those giving us minimum 3 power charges. We actually have a limit of 4 power charges, so you could spam a spell and your Anathema Ring will bump you from 3 to 4. It's a way to get an extra 50% crit chance right there. We are getting some crit chance on the belt. I have a Watcher's Eye that's giving me 95% increased. On the tree, Doomcast, High Voltage, and the Pathing Nodes give us something like 200%. A Bottled Faith can give you between 100 and 150 depending on the roll, and a Diamond Flask gives you 100. And all this added together is giving me over 100% crit chance. If you don't have all these pieces, you can look into an Elegant Hubris Timeless Jewel. That can give a ton of critical strike chance. Also, medium crit chance clusters are quite high value. I believe they also come with nice extra things like chance to deal double damage. I'm not using medium clusters, but that is an option to pump up that number even further. I guess we can do a quick rundown of my passive tree before we move on to the gear. Now we're using some tech to get these points very easily. It's a Necromantic Aegis, Impossible Escape. This Dreamer point, as well as the small point, really help to fix our mana cost, as not only do we have to account for our sparks cost, but we are casting 3 curses on Arcanist Brand, and Arcanist Brand triggers pretty fast, so we really want to reduce mana cost as much as possible. If you're not able to afford this, there is alternative tech where you can put a Militant Faith over here. You can choose 2 mods on the Militant Faith. One of them would obviously be reduce mana cost of skills. The other one would be whatever you end up choosing. It's going to reduce your mana cost by quite a bit. And if you want to double down and reduce it even further, you would go over here to grab a Natural Instinct. A Natural Instinct is going to allocate all these unallocated nodes, which are going to be in range of the Militant Faith, to help reduce the mana cost a lot. So if this Necromantic Aegis becomes unreachable in terms of price, this is another option. As for the rest of this tree, just bear in mind you want to grab all these masteries. Masteries give us a lot of bonuses through polymath, so the masteries are important to grab. If you want to save the 35 div on the Frenzy Charge Grand Spectrum, you can just grab Frenzy Charge right here. In fact, I would recommend that. I just had the extra currency, so I ended up picking up the Frenzy Charge. But yeah, this is, you should deviate from what I'm doing. Grab the Frenzy Charge right there. What else? Yeah, I just have a Corrupted Blood Jewel over here. Grand Spectrums. We're using Ancestral Vision to give us around 50% ailment avoidance. I'm actually overcapped to Spell Suppress, so this is giving me a little bit more. You only need to get 50% from there, because you can get 50% ailment avoidance on your boots. Yeah, I think you could just follow the tree. The large cluster shouldn't be too expensive. This one gives a lot of damage, you know, Practice Caster, spell damage, cast speed, Essence Rush. We're always leeching because we have Overleech. This is a lot of damage. Again, some damage up here. You could go for 2 of those for lots of damage, but I opted for some utility down here. You know, we're getting some blind. Blind is useful because we are an evasion-based character. Some penetration. Snowstorm's a really good damage node. Again, these are flexible. I guess tattoos. We should talk about tattoos. I'm opting to go for a +1 to all intelligence skill gems down here. It's a good chunk of damage. That's probably the large tattoo you want to grab. You want to replace as much dex as you can with increased prod speed, although we do need a fair bit of dex for Sniper's Mark, so just keep that in mind. If you get some dex on your gear, you can probably grab even more prod speed, but I wasn't able to grab too much. As for all your int, these 3% increased global defenses will give you slightly more energy shield than 10 int will, but it'll also have the added benefit of giving us more evasion rating. And these are like 2C a pop, so I just threw it on every single int node I had. And most other leagues will want to scale int anyways, because int is a pretty good scaler for energy shield, but it just so happens that these tattoos are even slightly better, which is nice. And keep in mind as well, you can do a +4 to all attributes onto any of your 3 attributes, because really strength and dex, you want to keep those as low as possible while still being able to maintain your gear requirements. And this will let us transfer whatever is left over onto int to give us some more tankiness. Path to tree is pretty standard. You can make some deviations. Again, we are pretty stretched for points, so everything on here is very valuable. And there is a, you know, this is not a bad node. You get You get the jewel node over there. Some people are going to do this for a natural instinct. You can grab this as well. So you're going to have to make some trade-offs. If you have a really good jewel, maybe you cut something from the tree and you grab a jewel socket. Otherwise, I think this is a fairly good blueprint. Let's spend some time to go over the skill gem choices. First of all, we are using an Arcanist brand to cast 3 curses, and this is going to cost a lot of mana because the Arcanist brand is spamming these curses. So I'm able to maintain this, although if you feel this is too uncomfortable, you can drop Punishment and put in Inspiration, and it's going to lower the cost of these 2 dramatically and trivialize the mana issue. If you do put in the Inspiration and you run 3 curses, because we are also self-casting Conductivity, you are able to drop Power Charge. Our Power Charges are also our curse limit thanks to the Anathema Ring. The way I maintain mana to be able to cast this very expensive setup is through a flask. I'm using a diamond flask that has the prefix 35% chance to gain a flash charge when you deal a critical strike chance, and we are crit capped, so we are always critting. We also have a lot of cast speed. While this flask is up, it is reducing our mana cost by 25%. Now this sounds a little jank, but you know, I've done like 4+ minute boss fights. I've done some of the Uber bosses where they just have increased life mods and the fight takes forever. This is generally up all the time because you're not only getting flash charges through your crits, you're also inherently getting flash charges simply by hitting the boss and doing damage. So both of those things stacked together keep this up all the time. One thing to note is these prefixes for flash charge when you deal critical strike, they don't stack, so you can only get this on 1 flask, and you want to get this combo on a flask that only consumes 20 charges, and Diamond Flask is my only flask that can do this. The other ones consume more charges. This is a very efficient way. And I think I touched earlier in the video, you can use a Militant Faith with a Natural Instinct to reduce your mana cost greatly. So that's another piece of tech you could use. I think DS Lily also has some tech where she uses a Trader Keystone through a different Timeless Jewel to keep her flasks up all the time. So there's a few different ways to do it. I'm very happy with this. Like, I know it sounds jank, but to me this feels really good. So this is what I'm sticking with. I may eventually switch over to a Natural Instinct with Militant Faith because that also has some other upsides. Next on to the Spark. We have Spark with Pinpoint, Divergent Inspiration to reduce our mana cost, Energy Leech, increase critical damage, awaken Spell Echo. And the things to note here would be for Pinpoint, you must grab +1 intensity. It's a massive damage increase. Also for Divergent Inspiration, you need to make sure your Spark mana cost is not 0 because Inspiration has a lot of bonuses if you are at least spending 1 mana. So it might happen, for example, if you do choose to use some alternative tech on the tree, such as the one down here, this will reduce your Spark cost to 0, to below 0. So in that case, you would want to either use a Divergent Inspiration with lower quality. You can buy like a Corrupted Bricked one, or maybe you might have lowered the mana cost so much that you can just go back to default Spark or default quality Inspiration. It's probably, you won't have to do this sort of stuff, but just keep that in mind. Inspiration, you need to spend mana on Spark. And then these other links, they're just the best damage links in my opinion. Now, for another 4 link, we have Flame Dash, Arcane Surge, Vortex, Culling Strike. So our Flame Dash and our Vortex can both proc Arcane Surge for some more mana regen and damage, as well as Culling Strike so that the boss dies as soon as he hits 10%. You may want to drop something in here, either Arcane Surge or Culling Strike, for Shield Charge. I'm opting to not use Shield Charge, but Shield Charge is very comfortable. You probably want to find a way to include it. As for this 3 link, we have caster damage taken, sending out Wave of Convictions to give the enemy some lightning exposure, as well as Immortal Call, which is a guard skill. We also have Anomalous Blood and Sand, which is a core component of any Ashes Spark build. It gives us up to 50% proj speed depending on the rolls on the Ashes. Frost Shield, again, you just cast this when you are fighting just whatever. It just boosts our crit chance. Conductivity, the reason why we're self-casting this instead of another curse is because this has the highest mana cost by far, and Arcanist Brand is proccing these curses very fast, so you don't want to put any more strain on the mana over here. So we're just going to self-cast this on bosses. We're running Grace, Discipline, Wrath. Maybe an Enlighten 4 would help us fit in something else, but I'm just, you know, this stuff fits right now. We're just going to keep it at Enlighten 3. And that's it. Those are the skill gems. Some other options you could use in here would be a Divine Blessing with Inspiration, and you could couple that with Wrath. Actually, you could get alt quality Wrath, and in that case, you would take out Wrath here for either Zealotry or Haste. So that is an option that you could do. I probably will do that. Again, this is pretty bare bones right now. I might have to do the tech to reduce mana costs in order to accomplish this. I'm not too sure. But yeah, that's the skill gems. Pretty straightforward. Let's wrap this video up by going through the gearing. Right here we have a wand. This is self-crafted using my Perfect Spark Wand crafting guide, and it costs around 10 to 20 div depending on how lucky you are. I would use the guide on the channel. It's very straightforward. As for the helmet, I crafted this using dense fossils, and we did this on a energy shield evasion base, because if you have evasion on the helmet, glove, and boots, you can use the mastery for 15% spell suppression. So simply slammed on those dense fossils for hitting the prefixes, and the suffixes I cleaned up using Eldritch Currency. I did the exact same thing with the body armor. We hit the prefixes using dense fossils. You can expect to spend maybe 300, 400 to hit this. However, these fossils are extremely cheap. They're like 1 chaos each. So it's really not that expensive, even though it takes a long time. You can get a fractured suffix. I chose to go for T2 spell suppression. You could also go for fractured intelligence, because intelligence is a really good scaler for energy shield. That would be just as good. Try and get like a T1 roll there. You could opt to fracture a prefix. It would make rolling it easier, although I don't mind the 300 to 400 fossil spams. So for me, I opted to go suffix route. Now for the boots, the important thing on here is, again, evasion, energy shield, as well as chance to avoid elemental ailments. And you achieve this through Deafening Essence of Loathing. I have fractured movement speed, so I could just spam this. But realistically, if you don't have a fracture, you want to have good suffixes, so spam this until you're happy with the suffixes. And then you could do Suffix Can't Be Changed, Veiled Chaos to get movement speed hybrid on there. For the belt, the main thing to note here is don't try and buy one that already is Crusader influence, because I simply just slammed on a Crusader orb on here because Crusader prefixes are all really good for us. I think there's one really low weighting that's not good, but you can get energy shield, you can get crit chance. So look for one that has some resistances you want, preferably also has some energy shield in the prefixes. Algor Mortis is a lot of damage. This is why we're using Vortex on left click. Chavron's Revelation is a ton of energy shield. Right now we're at 6.6. We take it off, we're down to 5.3. So this is kind of core on any CI build. Anathema. This is enabling us to use the Arcanist brand setup. This isn't Ashes, actually. I just reskinned it to look like Dragon Fang, but I am using Ashes. Now, I'm opting to go the defensive route with an Aziri's Reflection. This solves a lot of defensive issues. First off, there is very high evasion and energy shield. That's always nice. It gives us intelligence, which is a lot of energy shield as well. It gives us some resistances. You know, it's hard to fit res in here, so that's welcome. Hex Reflection, unaffected by curses. We want curse immunity. So if you don't have one of these and you're dual wielding wands to do more damage, make sure you at least get curse immunity on your flasks. But I don't have to do that because I'm getting it here. It has increased effect of curses, which is nice since we are using 4 curses. So there's a lot of good value in here. I think there's merit to running just a simple 1 wand with Aziri's Reflection. It's a good amount of defense and damage. For the flasks, Bottled Faith, great for crit. Diamond, this is how we're solving our mana issues. Quicksilver, I decided to go with evasion rating on it. Silver, I went for Casspeed. This is pure damage on here. Onslaught's really good damage. Casspeed's the best damage suffix we can get. Now, if you didn't want to spend the money on Oriath's End, one option would just be to put a Jade Flask in there. I like to have the Bismuth effect of all Ellie res, since when we're doing mapping, a lot of stuff reduce our resistances, such as those shrines. So I opted to go for a suffix with elemental resistances. Alternatives would be to have a Sapphire, Topaz, and Ruby flask in here, although it's kind of hard to fit that in when we're going crit. But you could manage to do it probably, because there are so many ways to get crit. You don't need to use a Diamond Flask. And all those 3 flasks I mentioned also have the 20 charges, so you could easily do the tech that I'm doing with the Diamond Flask on Topaz, Ruby, or Sapphire. So if you want to take this into hardcore, I would recommend doing that. Just losing a bit of crit and getting that extra layer of LE defense. And right here I have the tech to put in to reduce mana cost further. So again, we would just put Militant Faith here. And 1, 2, 3, 4, slot this in here. You see how they overlap? It's like a Venn diagram. Everything in the middle is going to be giving us devotion, which is then going to be increasing my LE damage in this case, as well as reducing my mana cost. So that is some interesting tech that I was mentioning earlier. I think that wraps up this video. Hope you enjoyed the guide. I'm having a lot of fun on stream. We're going to be playing Trickster for quite a while. Again, this is still fairly bare bones. We have a lot of room for improvement, but I think this is a start. And if you want a crit swap on Trickster, I think this guide will help you out. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys live on Twitch. Peace out.